Every fucking time. This story is really gross. I decided I was going to get a job for the summer when I came home from school that year. It wasn't like I had my sights set on working at a 24-hour sex shop, but I needed some easy cash, and the last thing I wanted to do was work hard for it. Plus, I really like to smoke weed. Like a lot. And having some job that required a certain amount of thought and awareness was going to seriously cut into my being high all the time. When I saw the porn shop had a position that needed filling, no pun intended, I jumped at the chance, figuring that sitting around for 8 hours at a time watching fuck tapes while dusting the occasional dildo or two was the perfect gig for an open-minded, free-thinking stoner like myself. The manager, Jake, who insisted I call him Jakey, hired me on the spot, proclaiming he could tell by looking at me that I had the goods. I couldn't fault him there, and I wholeheartedly accepted the position without asking any further questions. My first shift was to be that night, during which Mr. Jakey assured me he would show me the ropes. I had just enough time to go home, get high, and come back. Don't worry, I got high again in the parking lot before I went in. Upon my arrival, Jakey did less showing me the ropes than he did flirting heavily with me for 30 minutes before losing interest, giving me a brief tutorial on the cash register and tossing me the keys as he headed out the door. "Oh yeah," he said, catching the door with his foot and sticking his head back in. "Keep an eye on the arcades. A couple of guys went back there a while ago. Haven't heard a peep from them since." "Arcade?" I replied to the backside of the door that shut fast behind him. "We have video games here?" I turned toward a silicone replica of Jesse Jane's vagina that was hanging on the wall beside me, waiting for it to open its lifelike rubber lips, which now included a self-lubricating aloe strip with warming gel, and have her answer my question. Our conversation was interrupted by the loud crack of a door slamming from somewhere toward the back of the shop. A moment later, a short, thin, half-naked man sprinted from the direction of the noise, making a beeline for the door. He was wearing only a pair of bright blue man-ties, and his exposed tan skin was very shiny, shimmery even. It was like his entire body had been coated in an extra high gloss candy finish. He was carrying a bunched-up ball of clothes that he was clearly in too big of a hurry to put on. He hit the door, plunged out into the world, and was gone without looking up or breaking stride. I sat there trying to decide if the man was real or I had just imagined him. "Did you see that?" I asked, turning to the pocket pussy. Just as I thought the thing was about to answer and assuage my fears of hallucination, I heard more noise coming from the back. First, there was a thud, followed by a clang, and then a sharp bang. For a second, I thought I was in the middle of a 60s-era Batman brawl when I heard someone call out. "Hello?" came a voice from the origin of the commotion. "Hello, is anyone out there? I could use some help back here." I sat for a moment, awaiting instructions from the rubber vagina on what to do in this situation, before I finally decided to answer back. Hello?" I stammered. I'm here. What can I do for you, sir?" "You can start by bringing your ass back here and helping me. I'm fucking stuck." "Oh," I said. "Oh, yeah, I mean, of course. On my way." I walked around the counter and in the direction of the man's voice, which was coming from down a hallway in the back of the store. There was a sign next to the hall with an arrow pointing down the dark, narrow opening that simply said, "Arcade." When I passed the first door, which was slightly ajar, I realized that this wasn't the same kind of arcade from my youth, where I spent hours pumping quarters into the latest iteration of Street Fighter that was out at the time. There was pumping going on in this arcade, but it wasn't quarters going into those slots. You see, this quote-unquote arcade, as they call it, is a small closet-sized room with a television screen embedded in the wall that plays an array of adult features. You pay at the counter for time in these arcade rooms, wherein you just want to get away from the hustle and bustle of life by sitting in a small dark room watching porno. In reality, these rooms served as hookup spots for the man on the go, looking to get a little strange or explore various elements of their sexuality. The arcade rooms were also used as a place for lower-end hookers to turn a quick trick, although that type of thing was highly discouraged in our establishment. "Hello?" came the voice again, clearly from the room 2 doors down. "You coming to help me or what?" "Oh, yeah," I called while staring into the screen. I became hypnotized by the flickering of flesh and undulating appendages, so it took a moment for my bong resin-clogged mind to break from the spell. "Yeah, man, I'm almost there." I laughed out loud to myself at the ironically timed delivery of my unintentional pun. Man, is there anything greater than sexual innuendo-inspired puns? Because if there is, I don't want to know about it. I approached the door to man's cries for help were coming from and tried to mentally prepare myself for what I was going to see on the other side. I'm no stranger to danger when it comes to seeing fucked up shit, so I went through a battery of bizarre images in my head with hope that they would help dull the shock of whatever reality had in store for me. Sadly, I must say that they did not. The first thing I remember seeing was hard to make out in their near darkness with only a small amount of pink-hued light from the television screen, but it looked like a moist tuft of animal fur with a quarter-sized divot taken right out of the middle. Slowly, my eyes began to adjust, and I was able to see the sharp detail of things as the entirety of the scene snapped into focus. There, lying on the floor, was a very overweight, very hairy, very, very oily gentleman with no pants on. He was lying on his side, facing me with his hands behind his back. His tremendous gut ballooned out from the bottom of the filthy yellow wife beater he was wearing, thankfully covering what I could only guess were a set of unimpressive genitals that even he was glad he couldn't see anymore. What I had initially mistaken for a tuft of animal fur turned out to be a veritable forest of dense, wire-like black hair growing out from the bottom of his belly in such a way that his torso appeared to be sporting a third-eye blind-inspired chin strap. The man's pants were wadded up in a tangle around his ankles, which I guess was part of the reason he was stuck on the floor. "Well, are you gonna help me or keep staring at my goodie bag all night?" My eyes snapped up to the man's ultra-hairy face to see that he was clearly not happy. A matted tangle of facial hair was smeared across his chubby face haphazardly, with no rhyme or no reason. Some of it looked as thick as his gut beard, but other parts seemed wispy and comical in comparison. I could see a sliver of wetness open and close in time with his voice, which I assumed was his mouth. I watched his tongue dance frantically around the hairline edges, darting desperately in and out like a sarlacc pit after puberty. That's gross. Yeah, I finally said. "Sorry, let me give you a hand." When I took a step in, I could clearly see why his arms were around his back. He was in handcuffs, and the tiny steel bracelets were clearly cutting off the circulation in his wrists. The irritated skin spilled over the handcuffs in puffy red waves of quivering fat, begging to be freed from the tremendous pressure. When my foot landed, it found a puddle of whatever had made this obese, naked man so shiny, and I slipped forward, losing my balance. I tried desperately to grab at the wall and steady myself, but it too was covered in the mystery substance. Ugh! The man's eyes growing wide enough to push past the thick hedge of this unibrow were the last thing I saw as I started going down, like they had grabbed me with an invisible tractor beam from which resistance was futile. I landed on the man face first, slamming my head against his woolly beard, which actually helped to sort of cushion the blow. His beard, however, was so saturated in the slick wetness that droplets of moisture flung off upon impact like the slow-motion sweat of LeBron James on a Gatorade commercial. The rest of my body landed nicely across the wet, naked man, and my arms inadvertently wrapped around his torso, as if I were here to deliver the world's wettest and most awkward bear hug. No pun intended. "Jesus Christ, kid," yelled the man. "Get the hell off me and help me up already. I'm not back here giving out freebies." I tried desperately to push myself up and off his hairy gut, but it was so slippery it felt like I was fighting against quicksand. The more I struggled, the worse it got, until I finally managed to roll off and pull myself to my feet using the bench seat attached to the wall opposite the television. When I was on my feet, I was able to steady myself and managed to keep my balance despite now realizing that the entire floor was covered in this stuff. I also must mention that since I took something of an 8-second style ride on my tubby incapacitated new friend, I too was also completely covered in slippery goo. I took a deep breath and accepted that this was indeed my reality, and I was going to have to act calmly to get out of it. Okay, I said to the man. "Where is the key to the handcuffs? We need to get those off first, and fast." That little lion thieving bastard took him and left me here like this. Oh, okay, I said, turning to look at the mashing of sex organs on the screen, hoping it would inspire a solution to this problem. That's when it hit me. I'll be right back, I told the man as I very carefully stepped out of the room, making my way back to the main area of the store. I rushed over to the wall where several leather whips were hanging along with a latex suit complete with a zipper mouth mask. Smack in the middle of those things hung several packages of novelty handcuffs, and I ripped one open to retrieve the key. I dashed back down the hall, carefully stepped into the room, and bent over the man who kindly rolled onto his bulbous gut to make his tethered arms more easily accessible. I had no idea if this key would work, as I was only operating under the assumption that all, or most, novelty sex shop handcuffs use a universal key. As I felt around the metal loops for the keyhole, the television screen changed, casting a brighter light across the room, and something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. I ignored it at first, doing my best to focus on my task at hand, but as I struggled to get the key in, I couldn't help but glance over at the man's bare ass. He had the common physical malady that afflicts most overweight men, and that his ass was completely flat, resembling a child's pool toy with the final wisps of air escaping upon deflation. Unfortunately, this also made what caught my eye all the more noticeable. Jutting out from between the two flat, cellulite-bespeckled ass cheeks was the butt end, again, no pun intended, of a big, black butt plug. Blah! Like I said, I've seen some shit, so whereas this might throw off the average person from performing most tasks, I had halfway expected it and remained unfazed. The key finally found its home and made a satisfying click as I turned it, letting us both know that it had worked. With his arms now free, he wasted no time, pulling himself to his feet using the bench, just as I had moments ago. I stepped back to give him room, and a second later we were standing face to face in the small, dark arcade room. "Thanks," said the man, huffing to catch his breath. "Would you mind giving me a minute to, collect myself, please?" "Oh, yeah," I said, backing out. "Sure." I closed the door behind me and made my way back to the front of the store. I grabbed a couple of novelty towels embroidered with slave and master from the shelf to try and soak up of whatever it was that I was now mostly covered in. I sat back down on the stool behind the counter and after several minutes of silence started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing when I heard the door from down the hall finally open. The large, hairy man walked up to the counter looking like Sasquatch auditioning for a Vidal Sassoon commercial. The hair on his face and head was unintentionally styled in a way similar to Flock of Seagulls, which I can only guess was a result of his hasty cleanup. It was actually sort of beautiful to see. "Hey, thanks for the help back there," he said, looking me right in the eye. "This is for you." He laid a damp $10 bill on the counter, nodded at me, and walked right out the door. I could see the shiny black butt plug sticking out of his back pocket as he left. I stared at the bill, trying to decide whether I should feel insulted or grateful at this gesture, before finally just putting the slimy money in my pocket. For most people, experiencing something like that on their first day of a new job would prompt them to quit on the spot, leaving mortified and somewhat broken. Not me, though. I chalked it up to just being another day on the job and stayed the entire summer. I talked to that rubber pussy on the wall more than any of my friends and family for those few months. I guess you could say it became the Wilson to my Tom Hanks. At the end of everything, I felt like she really understood me. I didn't come home the following summer and wasn't able to visit the shop at all over the next year or so, but Jake told me that if I ever needed a job, I always had a place there. I'm not sure why, but that sentiment strangely comforted me, taking some of the sting out of the loneliness I felt trying to find my way during that part of my life. I never ran into that man I helped in the arcade that night again, but I kept the key to the handcuffs in my wallet, and that's where it still is today, just in case.